Chapter 3. Once again, he was sitting in the green armchair close to the open window. The weather was the same as when they had arrived. Glorious hot sunshine, yet cool air in the mornings when the municipal cleaning trucks drove up and down the streets. It was cool, too, during the day, beneath the trees that were everywhere, in the park, along the riverbank, and lining the many avenues. He had eaten his 3 croissants. His cup of coffee was still half full. His wife next door was running a bath, and he could hear the footsteps of the guests on the floor above who had just risen. It was not without irony that he was slipping so easily into these new habits. Wherever he was, he inevitably created a routine which he obeyed as if he had no choice. It could be said that each of his investigations in Paris had its own pace, with its pauses in particular cafes and bars, particular smells, and particular quality of light. Here he felt more as if he was on holiday than undergoing treatment, and the death of the lady in lilac was set against a backdrop of idleness. The previous evening, like the other evenings, they had gone for a stroll in the park, where hundreds of visitors like them moved from the shade into the light shed by the frosted glass spheres. It was the hour of theatres, casinos, and cinemas. People came out of their hotels, boarding houses or lodgings where they'd eaten cold meats, and they were all hurrying to their chosen entertainment. Many were content to sit on the yellow iron chairs with their romantic curves, and Maigret had automatically looked for the upright, dignified form, with her long face, high chin, and gaze that was both nostalgic and steely. Hélène Lange was dead, and in a hotel room Francine was probably discussing with her gigolo where her sister was to be buried. Somewhere in the town, a man had the key to the mystery of Les Iris and the solitary woman, the man who had strangled her. Was he still out walking in the park, or was he on his way to a theatre or cinema right now? Maigret and his wife had gone to bed without talking about it, but they both knew that it was on the other's mind. He lit his pipe and turned the page of his newspaper to find the local news. He frowned on seeing a photograph of himself splashed over 2 columns, a shot he'd never seen, taken without his knowledge when he was drinking one of his daily glasses of water. Beside him, about a third of his wife's form was visible, and behind him, 2 or 3 anonymous faces. Maigret to investigate. Out of discretion, we had not informed our readers of the presence among us of Detective Chief Inspector Maigret, who is in Vichy not on a case but to enjoy, like so many other illustrious figures before him, the therapeutic benefits of our waters. But will the inspector be able to resist the urge to elucidate the mystery of Rue du Bourbonnais? Reportedly, he was seen outside the house where the murder took place, and is even said to be in contact with the affable Detective Chief Inspector Lecoeur, head of the Clermont-Ferrand Police Judiciaire, who is in charge of the investigation. Will Inspector Maigret give priority to his treatment, or— He threw down the newspaper without anger, because he was used to this kind of rumour, shrugged, and stared vaguely out of the window. Until 9 o'clock his movements were the same as on the other mornings, and when Madame Maigret appeared in a pink suit, they made their way quite naturally downstairs. "Have a good day, Monsieur Maigret, Madame." That was the owner's inevitable morning send-off. Maigret had already spotted 2 figures on the pavement, the glint of a camera lens. "They've been waiting for you for an hour. It's not the ones from La Montagne, where you were mentioned this morning. They're from La Tribune, from Saint-Étienne." The man with the camera was a tall redhead. The other was short and dark, with one shoulder higher than the other. They raced over to the entrance. "May we take a photo? Just one?" What was the point of saying no? He stood still for a moment between the 2 shrubs either side of the main door, while Madame Maigret retreated to the shadows. "Lift your head up a little, because of the hat." This was the first time in ages that he'd been snapped wearing a straw hat, and he only wore one in Mont-sur-Loire, an old gardener's hat. "Just one more. Just a second shot. Thank you. Monsieur Maigret, may I ask you if you really are handling the case?" "As head of the crime squad at Quai des Orfèvres, it is not my job to get involved with investigations outside Paris. But you're interested in this murder, aren't you? As are most of your readers. Does it not present a rather unusual character?" "I don't understand what you mean." "The victim was a loner. She didn't socialize at all. There doesn't appear to be any motive to— When we know more about her, the motive will probably become clear. It was a non-committal answer that didn't compromise him in any way. All the same, it contained a truth. Maigret was not the only one who'd been seeking for a long time to learn about murder victims' characters. Criminologists were attaching a growing importance to the dead person, even going so far, in many cases, as to place a large share of the blame on them. Was there not, in the life and behavior of Hélène Lange, something that predestined her somehow to die a violent death? The moment he first set eyes on her in the shady park, she had intrigued Maigret. True, others, like the merry couple, had also caught his eye. Wasn't Inspector Lecoeur once part of your team? He used to work for the police judiciaire in Paris. Have you seen him? Only to say hello to. Will you see him again? Very likely. Will you discuss the murder with him? Possibly, unless we discuss the weather and the special quality of the light in your town. What's special about it? A certain shimmer, a certain softness. Do you plan to come back to Vichy next year? That depends on my doctor. Thank you. They both jumped into an old car while Maigret and his wife walked a few paces along the street. Where shall I wait for you? That implied that her husband intended to go to Rue du Bourbonnais. At the spring? At the bull game? In other words, he didn't plan to stay with Lecoeur for long. He found him in the cramped lounge, busy on the telephone. Have a seat, Chief. Hello? Yes. It's lucky the concierge has stayed in the job for so many years. Yes. She doesn't know where. She took the metro? Yes, at Saint-Georges. Don't hang up, mademoiselle. Go on, my friend. The conversation continued for another 2 or 3 minutes. Thank you. I'll send you a formal letter of request, so that everything is in order. Then you can send me your report. Your wife. Of course. Kids are always a worry. Don't I know it with my 4 boys? He hung up and turned to Maigret. That was Jules A, whom you must know, and who's currently an inspector in the 9th arrondissement. I asked him yesterday to rummage around in the files, and he found Hélène Lange's exact address in Rue Notre-Dame de Lorette, where she lived for 4 years. So from the age of 28 to 32. That's correct. The concierge is still there. Mademoiselle Lange was reportedly a quiet young woman. She kept regular hours like a person who works. She went out rarely in the evenings to go to the theatre or the cinema, apparently. Her office can't have been in the neighborhood, because she took the metro. She went out and did her shopping early, and she didn't have a cleaner. At around 12:20, she'd come home for lunch and would leave at 1:30. Then she'd return home again at 6:30. She didn't have any visitors? A man? Just one, and always the same. Does the concierge happen to know his name? She knows nothing about him. He only came once or twice a week, at around 8:30, and he always left at 10 o'clock. What sort? A respectable man, apparently. He had a car. It never occurred to the concierge to write down the registration number. A large black sedan. Probably American. How old? Around 40. Quite stout. Very elegant, very well dressed. Was it he who paid the rent? He never went into the lodge. Did they go away for the weekend together? Once? On holiday? No. At that time, Hélène Lange only took 2 weeks' holiday, and every year she went to Étretat, where she had her post forwarded to a family boarding house. Did she receive a lot of mail? Very little. The occasional letter from her sister. She had a subscription to a local bookshop, and she read a lot. Can I look around the apartment? Make yourself at home, Chief. He noticed that the television wasn't in the lounge, but in the Provençal-style dining room with a lot of shiny brass pots. On the dresser stood a photo of Hélène Lange playing with a hoop, and another of her posing in a swimsuit in front of a cliff, most likely at Étretat. She had a good figure, slender like her face, but not skinny, not withered. She was one of those women likely to be misjudged when dressed up. The modern, cheerful kitchen had a dishwasher and all the appliances that make the housewife's life easier. The rooms led off from the hallway, and Maigret found himself in a bathroom that was also modern, and finally in the dead woman's bedroom. He was amused to find the same brass bedstead as at the hotel, and almost the same ornate furniture. The striped wallpaper was pale pink and mauvey blue, and here too was a photograph showing Hélène Lange, aged around 30. Her expression was very different, and her spontaneous open smile exuded joie de vivre. It was an enlarged Polaroid, and a background of foliage suggested it had been taken in a wood. She was gazing into the camera with a certain affection. "I'd be curious to know who was taking the photograph," muttered Maigret to Lecoeur, who had joined him. "Strange girl, wasn't she?" "I presume you've questioned the lodgers?" "It also occurred to me that the murder could have been committed by someone in the house. The widow's out of the frame because, despite her bulk, she's not strong enough to strangle someone as resilient as Mademoiselle Lange. We checked the Carlton, where she was indeed playing bridge, until 11:20. Whereas, according to the coroner, the murder must have been committed between 10 and 11 p.m. In other words, when Madame Virveau got home, Hélène Lange was already dead. That is almost certain. The Moleskis saw a light under the lounge door. Since the lights were out when the body was found, the murderer must still have been in the house. I keep saying to myself, either he came in with his victim and strangled her before ransacking the room, or she caught him in the act, and he suffocated her. What about the man Madame Virveau claims to have bumped into on the street corner? We're working on it. At around that time, a bar owner who was lowering his metal shutter saw a corpulent individual walking hurriedly. He states that the man sounded out of breath. In which direction? Towards Les Célestins. No description. He didn't take any notice. All he knows is that he was wearing dark clothes and was hatless. He thinks he recalls that he had a receding hairline. No anonymous letters? Not yet. There would be. No case shrouded in mystery ends without the police receiving a number of anonymous letters and furtive telephone calls. You haven't seen the sister again? I'm waiting for her instructions as to what to do with the body. He added after a silence, "The two sisters are as different as chalk and cheese, aren't they? While one appears to have been reserved and withdrawn, with a certain disdain for everything around her, the other embraces life, exudes health, and yet—" Maigret smiled as he looked at Lecoeur, who, with the passing years, had indeed developed a paunch and had a few white hairs in his auburn moustache. His blue eyes were innocent, almost childlike, yet Maigret remembered him as one of his best colleagues. "Why are you smiling?" "Because I saw her alive, and from her photos and what you've been told about her, you have drawn the same conclusions as I have. Hélène Lange was a fake sentimentalist, a fake romantic, wasn't she? I believe she was playing a part, possibly for herself, but she couldn't help her eyes being hard and sharp. Like her sister. Francine Lange, on the other hand, plays the liberated woman, the girl who's afraid of nothing, who doesn't give a damn what people think. In La Rochelle, I'm sure she's a well-loved character whose hijinks are the subject of gossip, which doesn't stop her from occasionally. They didn't need to finish their sentences. She's no fool, and she knows what she wants, irrespective of all the gigolos on earth. Starting out from a little shop in Marcilly now at 40, she's the owner of one of the biggest hair salons in La Rochelle. I know the town and Place d'Armes. He took his watch out of his pocket. My wife's waiting for me. At the Spring. First of all, I'm going to clear my mind and watch the Boulez game. I tried playing once in Poirot. If those gentlemen twist my arm— He walked off, filling a new pipe, and found the air much warmer. He was glad to be back in the shade of the big trees. Any news? Nothing of interest. They still know nothing of her life in Paris. His wife watched him for signs she should stop asking questions, but she felt emboldened by his cheerful mood. Nothing precise. Only that she once had a lover. You sound happy about that. Perhaps. It suggests that at one point in her life at least she had a good time. She hasn't always been withdrawn, brooding over heaven knows what notions or dreams. What's known about him? Almost nothing, except that he drove a big black car, that he came to see her only once or twice a week, that he left before 10 o'clock at night, and they never spent the holidays or weekends together. A married man, most likely. Around 40, 10 years older than her. Didn't the residents of Rue du Bourbonnais ever see him? First of all, he's no longer 40. He must be getting on for 60, if not more. Do you think— I don't think anything— I'd like to know how she lived in Nice, whether there was a transition or whether she behaved like a spinster as she did here. Watch. He's going to shoot the jack out. It was the one-armed player who took his time, shot his bully, and sent the wooden jack flying onto the lawn. I envy them. He couldn't help muttering. Why? He thought she looked younger, with the interplay of light and shadow on her smooth face. Her eyes were shining. He felt as if he was on holiday again. Haven't you noticed their attitude, their air of importance, the expression of intense satisfaction when they pull off a good shot? Whereas when we wrap up an investigation— He broke off mid-sentence, but the expression on his face said it all. They sent a man to court, to prison, or sometimes to his death. He stopped and said, after emptying his pipe, "Shall we walk?" Wasn't that why they were there? Lecoeur's colleagues had questioned all the neighbours. Not only had no one seen or heard anything on the night of the murder, but they were all unanimous in asserting that Hélène Lange had no friends, male or female, and that she never received any visitors. Sometimes she goes away, carrying a little hold-all, and the shutters stay closed for 2 or 3 days. She never took a bigger suitcase. She had no car and did not call a taxi. Nor did anyone ever run into her in the street in the company of another person, man or woman. In the mornings, she'd go out to the local shops. She wasn't especially stingy, but she knew the value of money, and on Saturdays she'd go to the big market to buy food, always wearing a white hat in summer, a dark one in the winter. As for her current lodgers, they were in the clear. Madame Villevaux had rented a room on the recommendation of a friend from Montmartre, who had stayed with Mademoiselle Lange for several seasons. Although she was quite conspicuous because of her stoutness and her fake jewellery, she wasn't the sort to murder someone, especially without a motive. Her husband had been a florist, and up until his death she'd helped him in his shop on Boulevard des Batignolles before retiring to a small apartment in Rue Lamarck. "I have nothing against her," she said of Hélène Lange, except that she wasn't talkative. The Molesky had been taking the waters at Vichy for 4 years. The first year, they'd stayed in a hotel, and on one of their walks, they'd noticed a sign advertising a room to rent in Rue du Bourbonnais. They inquired about the price and booked the room for the following summer. This was their 3rd season in the house. Molesky suffered from liver disease, which forced him to take things easy and to follow a strict regimen. At 42, he was already a lackluster man with a sad smile, which did not prevent him from being, according to witness statements gathered over the telephone from Grenoble, a valuable professional and of scrupulous conscience. He and his wife had realized from the first year that Mademoiselle Lange did not wish to be on friendly terms with her lodgers. They'd only been into the lounge 2 or 3 times and were not acquainted with the other rooms on the ground floor. She had never invited them in for a drink or a cup of coffee. On rainy days, in the evenings, they sometimes heard the television below them, but it stopped early. Maigret was mulling over these details as he lay dozing on his bed as he did every afternoon, while Madame Maigret sat reading by the window. Through his eyelids, he could sense the golden half-darkness, the brighter stripes on the wall where the light filtered through the slats in the shutters. His convoluted thoughts went round and round in his head, and suddenly he wondered, as if this question were paramount. Why that night? Why hadn't she been murdered the previous day, or the next, 1 month, 2 months earlier? The question seemed absurd, and yet, in his drowsy state, he saw it as being of the utmost importance. For 10 years, 10 long years, she had lived alone in that quiet Vichy street. No one came to see her. She reportedly visited no one except, perhaps, during her brief monthly trips. The neighbours saw her come in and go out. She could also be spotted sitting on a yellow chair in the park, drinking her glass of water, or, in the evenings, in front of the bandstand listening to the concert. Had he gone to speak to the shopkeepers himself, Maigret would have asked questions that would doubtless have surprised them. Did she sometimes engage in empty chatter? Would she sometimes bend down to stroke your dog? Did she talk to the housewives waiting in the queue? And did she acknowledge the ones she ran into almost every day at the same time? And lastly, did you ever see her laugh, or even smile? You had to go back more than 15 years to find any personal contact with another human being, the man who came a couple of times a week to her apartment in Rue Notre-Dame-de-Lorette. Can a person live for so many years without occasionally confiding in someone, without at least getting things off their chest out loud? She had been strangled. But why that night? For the half-asleep Maigret, this became the key question, and when his wife informed him that it was 3 o'clock, he was still struggling to answer it. Did you sleep? I dozed. Are we both going out? Of course we're both going out. Don't we do that every day? Why do you ask? You might have arranged to meet Lecoeur. I haven't arranged to meet anyone. And to prove it, they went on a long walk, starting with the children's playground, then passing the Bulls games, the beach, and then, after the Bellerive Bridge, continuing along the boulevard to the yacht club, where they watched the water skiers. They went a lot further, towards the new apartment buildings which were 12 stories high and rose white against the sky, creating a town on the fringes of the town. On the opposite bank of the Allier, horses were galloping inside the white fences of the racecourse, and rows of heads and shoulders could be seen in the stands, as well as dark and light silhouettes on the grass. The hotel owner told me that more and more pensioners are coming to live in Vichy. He teased, "Is that what you're preparing me for?" "We have our house in Meung." They discovered quaint old streets. Each neighborhood had its epoch, its own style. The houses were all different, and you could guess the kind of person who had built them. Maigret enjoyed stopping outside the little restaurants dotted around and reading the menus. Room for rent? Room with kitchen? Beautiful furnished room? That explained the restaurants, and also the tens of thousands of people milling around in the streets and along the promenades. At 5 o'clock, they both sat down by the spring, their legs tired, and exchanged knowing smiles. Hadn't they overdone things a little? Were they not trying to prove to themselves that they were still young? They recognized two faces among the crowd, the merry couple, and there was something different in the look that the man gave Maigret. Now, instead of walking past, he was making a beeline for Maigret with his hand outstretched. What else could he do but shake it? "Don't you recognize me? I'm sure I have met you before, but I'm racking my brains. Bébert, does that ring a bell?" He had known a lot of Béberts, Petit Louis, and Grand Jules in the course of his career. The metro. He turned to his wife as if seeking her confirmation and was merrier than ever. "You arrested me for the first time on Boulevard des Capucines, on a day when there was a parade. I don't remember which head of state was strutting on horseback between the city guards. The second time was at the metro exit at Bastille. You'd been following me for a while. It was some time ago. I was young. So were you, with all due respect." Maigret recalled the metro arrest because, during the chase across Place de la Bastille, he'd lost his hat, a boater, as was fashionable at the time. Pah! That proved he'd already worn a straw hat. "How long did you get?" 2 years. That brought me to my senses. I went straight. First of all, I worked for a second-hand dealer where I patched up a load of junk because I've always been good with my hands. A wink implied that had come in very useful when he made his living from pickpocketing. Then I met Madame— He said the word emphatically and also with a certain pride. No criminal record. She was never on the game. She'd barely arrived from Brittany and she was working in a dairy. With her it was serious from the word go, and we tied the knot officially. She even insisted we marry in her village church, and it was a proper white wedding. He loved life with every fibre of his being. I thought I recognized you. Every day I looked at you, but I wasn't sure. This morning, when I opened the newspaper and saw your photo—" He pointed to the glass holders. "It's not serious, I hope?" "I'm in very good health." "So am I. All the doctors say so. They still sent me here because of the pains I get in my knees." Hydrotherapy, underwater massages, radiation therapy, the works. What about you? Glasses of water. Well, then it's nothing. But I don't want to keep you or your dear lady. You were very decent with me in the past. Those were the good old days, weren't they? Goodbye, Inspector. Say goodbye, sweetie pie. As the couple walked off, Maigret was still smiling at the colourfulness and the fate of the former pickpocket. Then his wife saw his expression gradually cloud and his brow furrow. Finally he gave a sigh of relief. I think I know why. Why that woman was killed? No. Why that particular day? Why not a month or a year ago? What do you mean? Since we've been here, we've met the same people 2 or 3 times a day, and their faces end up becoming familiar. It is only today, because of the photo in the newspaper, that loony was certain he recognized me and came to talk to me. Now this is our first visit. Our only one, most likely. If we were to return next year, we'd find a certain number of regulars. Someone is here in Vichy, like us, for the first time. He followed the routine, chose a doctor, was examined, had tests done, and was given his schedule, the names of the springs, the volume of centiliters to drink at such and such a time. He ran into Hélène Lange and thought he recognized her. Then he saw her a second time, and a third. Perhaps he wasn't far from her the other evening when she was listening to the music. It all sounded quite simple to Madame Maigret, and she was surprised that he was excited about a discovery that wasn't one. Maigret quickly added, ironically, according to the publicity brochures, some 200,000 people take the waters here each year, over a 6-month period. That means more than 30,000 each month. Let's say a third of them are first-timers like us, and that leaves some 10,000 suspects. No, because we should rule out women and children. How many women and children, do you reckon? More women than men. As for children... Wait. There are a number of people in invalid carriages. Others are on crutches or walk with sticks. Most of the old men would be incapable of strangling a woman who's still in her prime. She wondered whether he was being serious, or whether he was joking. Let's say 1,000 men physically capable of strangulation. And since we're talking about a tall, muscular individual, according to the eyewitness accounts of Madame Virevaux and the bar owner, that rules out the short and the puny men. That brings it down to 500. She was relieved to hear him laugh. Who are you laughing at? The police? Our profession. Later on, I'm going to tell the good liqueur that he's only got 500 suspects, unless we can eliminate any others, those who were at the theatre that night, for instance, and can prove it, the ones who were playing bridge or something else, and to think that this is often the way we arrest a culprit. Once, Scotland Yard questioned every resident in a town of 200,000. It took months. Did they find him? And Maigret replied, in a different town by chance, one night when the fellow was drunk and talked too much. It would probably be too late to see liqueur that day, because he still had 2 glasses of water to drink, with an interval of half an hour in between. He tried to take an interest in the evening newspaper, which was full of articles about celebrities on holiday. It was quite curious. Even those who led a frenetic life had themselves photographed with their children or their grandchildren, claiming that they devoted all their time to them. Later, when the breeze had become fresher, they turned the corner of Rue d'Auvergne. A van was parked outside Mademoiselle Lange's house. As they drew near, they heard the sound of hammering. "Shall I go back to the hotel?" murmured Madame Maigret. "I'll be along in a minute." The lounge door was open, and men in beige coats were hanging black drapes on the walls. Liqueur appeared. "I thought you'd come. Step this way." He led Maigret into the bedroom, which was quieter. "Is she being buried in Vichy?" asked Maigret. "Is that what the sister decided?" "Yes, she dropped in to see me before lunch." "With her gigolo?" "Number by taxi." "When's the funeral?" "In 2 days' time, to give the local people the opportunity to visit the chapel of rest." "Will there be an absolution?" "Apparently not." "Wasn't the Lander family Catholic?" "The old folk, yes. The girls were baptized and took their first communion. But since... unless she's divorced, for example. First, there'd need to be proof that she was married." Lecoeur looked at Maigret while twirling the tips of his auburn moustache. "You've never crossed paths with either of them in the past, I suppose?" "Never. But you spent a certain amount of time at La Rochelle." "I went there twice. Let's say 10 days in total." "Why?" "Because this morning I didn't find Francine Lange exactly the same. She was less chirpy. Her words didn't come out so directly. The entire time I had the impression that she had an ulterior motive, or that she wanted to tell me a secret. At one point she said, 'That was Inspector Maigret who was here yesterday, wasn't it?' I asked her if she'd met you before, and she replied that she'd recognized your photo in this morning's newspaper. A few dozen people among the thousands I walk past each day had the same reaction. Earlier, one of my former customers came up to shake my hand and was close to clapping me on the back." "I think it's more complicated," said Lecoeur, as if he was following a train of thought that was still hazy. "Do you think I might have had dealings with her at the time she was living in Paris?" "It's not impossible, given the life she must have led there. No. What I'm thinking is less specific, subtler. As far as she's concerned, I'm an ordinary provincial police officer doing his job as best he can and asking the questions he has to ask. Once I've written down the replies, I move on to the next. Do you see what I mean? That explains why, when she walked in here, she was very relaxed, and why, yesterday afternoon, she wasn't... She glanced over towards your corner a couple of times, but I could tell she hadn't recognized you. She's staying at the Hôtel de la Gare. As in most of the hotels here, the newspapers are taken up to the guests along with their breakfast. On seeing your photo, she wondered why you were present during our interview. What do you conclude from that? You're forgetting your reputation, the image the public has of you." He turned red, afraid his words might be misconstrued. "And not only the public, in fact. In the profession, we're the first. Let's move on. It's important. She said to herself that you weren't sitting there by chance. And even if it was by chance, the fact that you are involved in the case... Did she seem scared?" "I wouldn't go that far. I found her different, on her guard. I only asked her inconsequential questions, but each time she took the trouble to think hard before replying. She hadn't found the notary. I thought of that as well, and I spoke to her about it. Her companion drew up a list of all the notaries in town and telephoned them. Apparently none of them had Hélène Lange as a client. Only one, who was a clerk 10 years ago and who has since taken over his employer's practice, remembered having drawn up the deed of sale for this house. Do you have his name? Maître Hombeau? Do you want to give him a call? At this hour? Provincial notaries generally live in the house where they have their practice. What should I ask him? Whether she paid by cheque or by bank transfer? I'll have to ask the workman to stop banging while I telephone. Meanwhile, Maigret wandered into the bathroom and the kitchen, not thinking about anything in particular. Well? You guessed? What? She paid cash. It was the first time that had happened to our Rimbaud, so he remembered it. She had a small suitcase stuffed with notes. Have you questioned the ticket clerks at the station? Heavens, I didn't think of that. I'd be curious to know whether she went to the same or different places each month. I hope to be able to tell you tomorrow. Enjoy your dinner, and have a pleasant evening. It was a concert evening at the bandstand, and the Maigrets had walked enough to take a well-earned rest. Chapter 4. He was 10 minutes early. He didn't know why. Perhaps that morning there was less to read in La Tribune. Madame Maigret, who always used the bathroom after him, was still in there, and he said through the half-open door, "I'm going down. Wait for me downstairs." There was a green seat on the pavement for the hotel's guests. The sky was still as blue. Since they'd been in Vichy, it hadn't rained once. The owner was waiting for him at the foot of the stairs, as usual. So, what about this murderer? It's not my case, Maigret replied with a smile. Do you think those people from Clermont-Ferrand are up to the job? In a town like ours, it's not a good thing to have a strangler on the loose. Apparently several elderly women have already left. Maigret smiled vaguely as he made his way to Rue du Bourbonnais. From a distance he saw black drapes over the door with a large letter L embroidered in silver. There was no police officer outside. Had there been one the previous day? He couldn't remember. He hadn't paid any attention. In short, this wasn't his case. He wasn't here in a professional capacity. He was just a visitor taking the waters. He was about to press the bell when he noticed that the white door was open a fraction. He pushed it, saw a very young woman, barely 16, wiping a wet rag over the tiles in the hallway. She wore a dress that was so short that when she bent over, it revealed her pink underwear. Her legs and thighs were pudgy and shapeless, as is often the case at that awkward age. They were like the legs of a cheap doll and were the same artificial color. When she turned around, he saw a moon face with expressionless eyes. She didn't ask who he was or what he was doing there. "It's in there," was all she said, pointing to the lounge door. The room was dark, hung with black drapes, with the coffin resting on what must have been the dining-room table. The 2 candles weren't lit, but there was holy water in a glass bowl with a sprig of boxwood. The dining-room door was open, so was that of the kitchen. In the dining room, the furniture and items from the lounge had been piled up. In the kitchen, young Dissel was sitting in front of a cup of coffee, reading a comic album. "Do you want some coffee too? I've made a full pot." On the gas cooker of Hélène Lange, who would probably not have appreciated her kitchen being used in this way. "Is Inspector Lecoeur not here?" He received an emergency call in Clermont-Ferrand late yesterday evening. There was a hold-up at the Caisse d'Épargne, leaving 1 man dead, a passer-by who, on seeing the door ajar after closing time, pushed it open just as the thieves were coming out. One of them fired. "Nothing new here?" "Not to my knowledge." "Did you take care of the railway station?" "My colleague Trigault's dealing with it. He's probably still there." "The young servant girl I've just seen has been questioned, I presume. What does she say?" "From the look of her, it's already surprising that she can speak. She knows nothing. She was only hired for the season. Her job was to clean the lodgers' rooms. She didn't clean the ground floor because Mademoiselle Lange did her own housework. She's never seen any visitors. Only the man from the gas company and delivery boys. She started work at 9 o'clock and finished at midday. The Moleskis upstairs are worried. They've paid up until the end of the month. They're wondering whether they'll be allowed to stay. It's not easy to find a room at the height of the season, and they don't want to go to a hotel. What did Lecoeur decide?" "I think they're staying. In any case, they're up there. The other one, the fat woman, has just gone out to get herself pummeled by the masseurs. Hasn't Francine Lang arrived?" "I'm waiting for her. No one knows what's going to happen. She insisted on having a chapel of rest set up, but I wonder whether anyone will come. My instructions are to stay here and keep a discreet eye on the visitors, if there are any." "Have a good day, all the same," muttered Maigret, leaving the kitchen. He automatically picked up a book, bound in black cloth from a pedestal table which had been in the lounge and was now stashed with the rest of the furniture in the dining room. It was Lucien Leuwen. The yellowing pages had that particular musty smell of books from public libraries and bookshops that offer reading subscriptions. A purple stamp gave the name and address of the bookshop owner. He put the novel back on the table, and a moment later he was walking calmly down the street. A window was flung open, and a woman in curlers and a dressing gown called out to him, "Tell me, Inspector, is it true that we can visit?" The expression surprised him, and he stood there for a moment, baffled. "I imagine so, since there's a chapel of rest and the door is half open." "Can you see her?" "As far as I know, the coffin is sealed." She sighed. "I prefer that. It's not so scary." He found Madame Maigret sitting on the green seat, and she looked surprised to see him back so soon. They started walking like the other mornings. They were only a few minutes behind schedule, a schedule which, in actual fact, they'd never drawn up, but which they kept to as if it were of crucial importance. "Are there many people?" "No one. We're waiting." This time they started out at the children's playground, which was still almost empty, and they walked around it in the shade of the trees. Some of these, like those bordering the Allier, were rare species, from America, India, and Japan, and had both a Latin and a French name on a metal plaque. Many of them had been sent as gifts by forgotten heads of state, maharajas, or minor oriental princes, in gratitude for a course of treatment at Vichy. They barely paused by the boule players. Madame Maigret never asked her husband where he was going. He walked straight ahead, as if he had a goal. But most of the time, if he chose one street rather than another, it was for a change, to encounter new images, new sounds. Shortly before it was time for his glass of water, he went down Rue Georges Clemenceau, as if he had some purchases to make, but he turned left into one of the passages, Passage du Théâtre, where outside a bookshop were second-hand books in boxes and other colourful books on revolving stands. "Let's go in," he said to his wife, who was hesitant. The owner wore a long grey coat and was busy sorting out books. He appeared to recognize Maigret, but he waited. "Do you have a few minutes?" "At your service, Monsieur Maigret. I assume you wish to question me about Mademoiselle Lange. She was one of your customers, wasn't she?" "She came in at least once a week, more often twice, to change her books. She had a subscription that allowed her to borrow 2 books at a time." "Had you known her long?" "I took over the shop 6 years ago. I'm not from here, but from Paris, from Montparnasse. She already used to come when the previous owner—" "Did you converse with her?" "As you know, she wasn't very talkative." "She didn't ask you to recommend books for her to read?" "She had her own ideas. Come and have a look over here." At the back of the bookshop was a room stacked from floor to ceiling with books bound in black cloth. She would often spend half an hour, even an hour, examining the books, reading a few lines of one and then another. The last book she borrowed was Stendhal's Lucien Leuwen. Stendhal was her most recent discovery. Before that, she'd read all of Chateaubriand, Alfred de Vigny, Jules Sandeau, Benjamin Constant, Alfred de Musset, Georges Sand. Always the romantic novelists. Once, she took a Balzac, I don't remember which one, and brought it back the next day. I asked her if she'd disliked it, and she answered something along the lines of, "It's too violent." Balzac, violent, no modern-day authors? She never tried. On the other hand, she read and reread the letters of George Sand and Alfred de Musset. "Thank you." He'd almost reached the door when the bookshop owner called him back. "I was forgetting a detail which you might find amusing. I was surprised to find the books annotated in pencil. Phrases and words were underlined. Sometimes there was a cross in the margin. I wondered which of my customers had this compulsion, and I eventually found out it was her." "Did you mention it to her?" "I had to. My assistant couldn't spend all day erasing those marks." "What was her reaction?" "She looked offended and said, 'I apologize. When I read, I forget the books don't belong to me.'" The spa patients, the pale trunks of the plane trees, and the patches of sunlight were all in position, as well as the thousands of yellow chairs. She found Balzac too brutal. She probably meant too lifelike. She confined herself to the first half of the 19th century, arrogantly ignoring Flaubert, Hugo, Zola, and Maupassant. But all the same, on the first day, in a corner of the lounge, Maigret had spotted a pile of magazines. He couldn't help trying to flesh out the picture he had built up of her. She only read romantic novels, but there was sometimes a note of real steeliness in her gaze. "Have you seen Le Coeur? Number he was called to Clermont-Ferrand because of a hold-up. Do you think he'll find the killer?" Maigret gave a start. It was his turn to be brought back down to earth. As a matter of fact, he wasn't thinking of the murder. He had almost forgotten that the owner of the house with green shutters had been strangled, and that the most important thing was to catch her murderer. He, too, was looking for someone. He even thought about it more often than he'd have liked, to the point where it was becoming an obsession. What intrigued him was the man who, at one point, had found a place in this woman's solitary life. There was no trace of him in Rue de Bourbonnais. There was no photograph of him, no letter or brief note. Nothing. Nothing of anyone else either, apart from bills. One had to go back to Paris, to Rue Notre-Dame-de-Lorette, 12 years earlier, to find any mention of a rather hazy visitor who came once or twice a week and spent an hour in the apartment of the woman who was still young. Even the sister, Francine, who lived in the same city at the time, claimed not to know anything. Hélène Lange devoured books, watched television, did her shopping, her housework, went for walks in the shady park, like the people taking the waters, without speaking to a soul, and she listened to music by the bandstand staring straight ahead of her. He found this disconcerting. In the course of his career, he had encountered individuals, men and women, fiercely attached to their freedom. He had met maniacs who'd withdrawn from the world to hide away in the most unlikely places, often the most squalid. But these people always maintained some sort of connection to the outside world. For old women, it was a seat in a park, for example, where they'd meet another old woman, or the church, the confessional, the priest. Old men were regulars at a cafe where everyone knew them and casually greeted them. In this case, for the first time, Maigret was up against solitude in its pure state, a solitude that wasn't even aggressive. Mademoiselle Lange wasn't unpleasant towards her neighbours or the local shopkeepers. She didn't treat them with contempt and, despite her taste for certain colours and styles of dress, she did not put on airs. Quite simply, she took no notice of others. She didn't need to. She took in lodgers because she had empty rooms, and it gave her an income. But there was a dividing line between those rooms and the ground floor, and she'd hired a half-witted servant girl to clean the upstairs rooms. "May I, Detective Chief Inspector?" A shadow in front of Maigret, a lanky form gripping the back of a chair. Maigret had seen the man at Rue du Bourbonnais. He was one of Lecoeur's colleagues, probably Trigot. He sat down, and Maigret asked, "How did you know you'd find me here?" "Dissel told me." "And how did Dissel?" "There isn't a police officer in town who doesn't know you by sight, so that wherever you go—" "Is there any news?" "Last night I spent an hour at the railway station, because it's not the same staff on duty as during the day. I went back there this morning. Then I telephoned Inspector Lecoeur, who's still in Clermont. Won't he be coming today?" "He doesn't know yet. In any case, he'll arrive early tomorrow for the funeral. I presume you'll be there too. Have you seen Francine?" "She dropped into the funeral parlour. The transportation of the body will take place at 9 o'clock. It was probably she who sent the flowers." "How many wreaths?" "Just one." "Ascertain that it was her." "I'm sorry. I'm forgetting that it's none of my business." "That's not what the chief thinks, because he told me to be sure to tell you what I discovered. I have the feeling there are some in the squad, including yours truly, who are about to go on a trip." "Did she go far?" Trigot pulled a wad of papers out of his pocket and eventually found the one he was looking for. "They don't remember all her journeys, of course, but some names of cities struck them. For example, Strasbourg the month after a trip to Brest. They noticed that the connections weren't always easy, and she sometimes had to change trains 2 or 3 times. Carcassonne, Dieppe, Lyon. That's not so far. Actually, Lyon was an exception. Most of the trips were further. Nancy, Montélimar. No small towns? No villages? Only fairly large towns. True, she could have continued her journey by car because... No tickets for Paris? None. Had it been going on for long? The last clerk I questioned has been working at the same ticket window for 9 years. She was already a regular customer, he told me. The station staff knew her. They expected her. They would sometimes bet on which town she'd choose next. Were there specific dates? No, that's the thing. Sometimes they didn't see her for 6 weeks, especially in summer during the season, probably because of her lodgers. Her trips didn't correspond to the end of the month or set intervals. Did Lecoeur tell you what he plans to do? He ordered a number of photographs. He'll begin by sending men to the nearest towns, and today he'll send photos to the local police judiciaire headquarters. Do you know why Lecoeur wanted me to be informed? He didn't say anything to me. He must think that you have an idea. So do I, as a matter of fact. People always thought he was cleverer than he was, and if he protested, they were convinced it was a ploy. Are there many visitors at Rue du Bourbonnais? According to Dissel, it started at around 10 a.m. A woman in an apron pushed open the door and poked her head round. Then she took a few steps inside and found the chapel of rest. She took a rosary out of her apron pocket and her lips began to move. She made the sign of the cross with the holy water and then left. She was the one who triggered a stream of visitors. She informed the neighbors. Then the women came, alone or in pairs. No men? A few. The butcher, a carpenter who lives at the end of the street, people from the neighborhood. Why would the murder not have been committed by someone local? They were busy looking everywhere, piecing together the life of the lady in lilac in Nice, in Paris, her trips to all four corners of France. But no one had thought of the neighbors, the thousands of people who lived in the France district. Neither had Maigret. Is there anything I should be doing? It was not of his own accord that Trigault spoke those words, which must have been suggested to him by that cunning liqueur. Since they had Maigret on hand, why not use him? I wonder whether the ticket clerks might remember some precise dates. Not many, 2 or 3 would be enough. I already have one. The 11th of June. The fellow remembers because it was Reims, and his wife is from there, and that day was her birthday. If I were you, I'd go and check with the bank to see if there was a deposit on the 13th or the 14th. I see what you mean. Blackmail, eh? Or an allowance. Why pay an allowance on different dates and at irregular intervals? I'm wondering the same thing. Trigault gave Maigret a funny look, convinced he was hiding something or that he was making fun of him. I'd rather deal with the hold-up, he complained. With gangsters you generally know what to expect. I apologize for disturbing you. Good day, madame. He stood up, embarrassed, not knowing how to leave, and he had the sun in his eyes. It's too late for the bank. I'll go over there at 2 o'clock. Then, if necessary, I'll return to the station. Maigret, too, had once done that job, tramping around for hours, on burning or wet pavements, questioning people who were mistrustful, and who he'd had to worm words out of one at a time. We must go for our glass of water. While Trigault would probably quench his thirst with a large beer. See you at the spring, around 11. I hope I'll be there. There was a hint of irritability in his voice. Madame Maigret had been worried he'd be bored in Vichy, doing nothing from morning till night with only her company. His smiling serenity of the first few days had only half reassured her, and she wondered how long that mood would last. But now, for the past 3 days, he'd been genuinely annoyed each time he missed one of their walks. Today was the funeral. He'd promised liqueur he'd attend. The sun was still shining, and in the streets there was that same mixture of morning coolness and moisture. Rue de Bourbonnais afforded an unusual sight. In addition to the residents, who could be seen at their windows, resting on their elbows as if to watch a procession, curious onlookers lined the curbs, forming a cluster close to the house of the dead woman. The hearse had already arrived. Behind was parked a dark car, no doubt supplied by the undertakers, and then another which Maigret hadn't seen before. Liqueur came out to meet him. I had to abandon my gangsters, he said. Hold-ups happen every day. The public's used to them, and they aren't affected by them anymore. Whereas a woman strangled in her own home in a quiet town like Vichy, without any apparent motive. Maigret recognized the auburn mop of the photographer from La Tribune. 2 or 3 others were at work in the street, and one of them snapped the 2 police chiefs crossing the road. In short, there was nothing to see, and the bystanders looked at one another as if wondering what they were doing there. Have you got men in the street? 3. Dessel doesn't appear to be here, but he can't be far away. He had the bright idea of asking the pork butcher's boy to come with him because he knows everybody. He'll be able to point out the people who aren't from this neighborhood. There was nothing sad or awe-inspiring about the scene. Everyone was waiting, including Maigret. Are you going to the cemetery? He asked Liqueur. I'd like you to come with me, Chief. I've brought my own car, thinking that a police car might be in bad taste. Francine? She arrived a few minutes ago with her gigolo. She's inside. Where's their car? The funeral directors, who know what's proper and what isn't on these occasions, probably explained to them that a red convertible was hardly any more appropriate for a funeral convoy than a police car. They'll be in the black saloon. Did she speak to you? She greeted me distractedly when she arrived. She seems on edge, worried. Before going inside the house, she scanned the throng as if she was searching for someone. I still don't see your young Dicelle. Because he's found a window somewhere for himself and his butcher's boy to watch the crowd. People came out of the house, and 2 more neighbours went in, emerging almost immediately. Then the driver of the hearse clambered into his seat. As if it were a signal, 4 men brought the coffin out, struggling to get it through the doorway, and slid it into the vehicle. One of them went back inside the house and returned with a wreath and a smaller bouquet. The bouquet is from the lodgers. Francine Lange waited on the doorstep, wearing a black dress that didn't suit her, which she must have bought the previous day in Rue Georges Clemenceau. Her companion could be seen behind her in the dark hallway. The hearse advanced a few meters. Francine and her lover got into the black car. "Come on, Chief." The people lining the street didn't move, and only the photographers ran down the middle of the road. "Is that all?" asked Maigret, turning around. "There's no other family? No friends? The lodgers?" "Aleski has an appointment with his doctor at 10 o'clock, and fat Madame Villevaux has her massage." They drove past 2 or 3 streets, which Maigret knew from having strolled down them on his wanderings. He filled his pipe, looked at the houses, and was surprised when the car came out in front of the station. The cemetery wasn't far away, just across the railway line. It was deserted. The hearse drove as far as it was possible for motor vehicles to go, so there were only 4 of them on a gravel path, apart from the undertakers. Lecoeur and Maigret instinctively moved closer to the couple. The boyfriend had put on a pair of shades. "Will you be leaving Vichy soon?" Maigret asked the young woman. He'd asked the question to make conversation without attaching any importance to it, and he noticed that she was watching him intently, as if to find out whether there was an ulterior motive behind his words. "I should probably stay on for 2 or 3 days to sort everything out." "What are you going to do about the lodgers?" "I'll let them stay until the end of the month. There's no reason not to. I'll simply lock up the ground floor rooms." "Are you planning to sell the house?" She didn't have time to reply because one of the men in black was coming over to her. The coffin was carried on shafts along a narrower path to the edge of the cemetery where there was an open grave. A photographer, not the tall redhead but another one, materialized from nowhere and took a few shots while the coffin was being lowered into the ground, and as Francine Lange threw a shovelful of earth into the grave on the instructions of the officiant. A few meters away beyond a low wall was a waste ground where wrecked cars lay rusting, and further away stood a few white houses. The hearse drove off, and so did the photographer. Lecoeur shot a look at Maigret, who didn't understand because he seemed lost in thought. What exactly was he thinking about? La Rochelle, which he was fond of. Rue Notre-Dame de Lorette, back in his early days when he was secretary to the superintendent of the 9th arrondissement. The Boule players too. Francine was walking towards them, a balled handkerchief in her hand. It hadn't been used to dry her tears. She hadn't cried. She had been no more emotional than the undertakers or the gravedigger. There had been nothing moving about that funeral, which had been as unromantic as could be. If she was fiddling with her handkerchief, it was to keep her composure. "I don't know what usually happens. Normally, after a funeral, there's a meal, isn't there? But I'm sure you have no wish to have lunch with us." "My work," mumbled Lecoeur. "Can I at least invite you for a drink?" Maigret was surprised at the change in her. Here, too, in the deserted cemetery from which even the photographer had disappeared, she kept looking about her as if some danger lurked. "I'm sure we'll meet on another occasion," replied Lecoeur diplomatically. "You still haven't found anything?" It wasn't him she looked at as she asked the question, but Maigret, as if she expected something of him. "The investigation continues." Maigret filled his pipe with little movements of his index finger, trying to understand. This woman had certainly had a few knocks and was capable of facing up to life without batting an eyelid. It wasn't the death of her sister that was affecting her because, on the first day, she'd been full of life and energy. "In that case, gentlemen, I don't know what else to say. Goodbye, then, and thank you for coming." Had she stayed a minute longer, Maigret would perhaps have asked whether anyone had threatened her. She walked off, teetering on her high heels, and as soon as she closed her hotel room door, she would tear off that black dress bought for the occasion. "What do you think?" Maigret said to his colleague from Clermont. "Did you notice as well? I'd like to interview her between 4 walls, but I'll have to think of a plausible reason to summon her." Today it would be inappropriate. She seems to be afraid. I had that feeling too. Do you think she's received threats? What would you do in my shoes? What do you mean? We don't know why her sister was strangled. It could be a family drama after all. We know almost nothing about these people. It could be some business that both women were mixed up in. Didn't she tell you that she'd be staying another couple of days in Vichy? I don't have many men available, but the hold-up can wait. We always catch the professionals in the end. Now they were in the car, driving towards the cemetery exit. I'll have her watched as discreetly as possible, although in a hotel that's almost impossible. Where shall I drop you off? Somewhere near the park. Of course you're here to take the waters. I don't know why I can't get that into my head. At first he thought his wife hadn't arrived yet, because he couldn't see her on her chair. They were so used to meeting at the same place every day that he was surprised to find her on a different chair, in the shade of another tree. He observed her for a moment without her spotting him. She didn't look impatient. In a pastel dress, her hands in her lap, she was watching the people walking past. A faint smile of contentment lit up her face. "You're here?" she exclaimed. Then immediately, "Our chairs are taken. I listened to them talking, and I believe they're Dutch. I hope they're only passing through and that we won't find them in our seats every day. I didn't think it would be over so quickly. The cemetery isn't far." "Were there a lot of people?" "In the street. Afterwards there were only 4 of us. Did she bring her lover? Come and have a glass." They had to queue for a while. Then Maigret bought the Paris newspapers, which barely mentioned the Vichy strangler. Only one, the previous day, had published a headline saying, "The Vichy Strangler," and below it was a photo of Maigret. He was curious to find out the result of the inquiries carried out in some of the towns the lady in lilac visited on irregular dates. Even so, his thoughts were vague. He read, his mind elsewhere, and over the top of his newspaper he could see the outlines of the promenaders. Soon they had to shift their chairs back because they were now in the sun. That was what was good about the spot that had been taken over by the Dutch. It was in a place the sun didn't reach at the times they were in the park. "Don't you want a newspaper?" "No. The merry couple have just gone past, and they gave you a big wave." They had already melted into the crowd. Did the sister cry? Number. He was still thinking about her. If he'd been in charge of the investigation, he too would have liked to question her in the calm atmosphere of his office. He thought about her again several times during the rest of the morning. They walked back to the Hôtel de la Bérésina, went upstairs to freshen up, and sat down to lunch. As always, partially drunk bottles of wine were on each table except for theirs, next to glass vases containing 2 or 3 flowers. "There's escalope Milanese or calf's liver à la bourgeoise." "Escalope," he sighed. "They'll serve mine without the sauce in any case. I'm just passing through, but Rian will still be here next year and the following years. He's the one who's important. Don't you feel better than in Paris?" "Only because I'm not in Paris. Besides, I never felt really bad. Lethargy, dizziness. I imagine it happens to everyone. But you trust pardon, don't you?" "I have to." They had eaten all the pasta they'd been given for the hors d'oeuvre and starter, and had just been served the escalopes when Maigret was told there was a phone call for him. The telephone was in a small sitting room that looked out onto the street. "Hello, I hope I'm not disturbing you. You're already having lunch?" He recognized Lecoeur's voice and muttered, "If you can call it that." "There's been a development. I'd sent one of my men to watch the Hôtel de la Gare. Before taking up his position, he had the bright idea of asking for Francine Langer's room number. The receptionist looked surprised and told him she'd left. When? Barely half an hour after saying goodbye to us. Apparently the pair of them came back, and, before going up to their room, the man asked them to prepare the bill. They must have packed their bags at top speed because, 10 minutes later, they telephoned to have their bags brought down. They crammed everything into the red car and drove off into the traffic. Maigret said nothing, neither did Lecoeur, and there was a fairly long silence. "What do you make of that, Chief?" "She's scared?" "Obviously, but she was already scared this morning, it was noticeable. Even so, she told us she was planning to stay in Vichy for another 2 or 3 days. Maybe so you wouldn't detain her. What right would I have had to detain her unless I'd had something on her? You know the law, but she doesn't. We'll find out this evening or tomorrow morning whether she's gone home to La Rochelle. It's most likely. I think so too. But all the same, I'm furious. I intended to see her again and have a long chat with her. It's true that I might learn more. Are you free at 2 o'clock? That was when Maigret took his nap, and he replied reluctantly, I don't have anything particular to do naturally. While I was out of the office this morning, someone telephoned the local police station and asked to speak to me. I'm here at the moment. In the end, I accepted the office they offered to lend me. It was a girl who gave her name as Madeleine Dubois, and guess what her job is? Maigret said nothing. She's the night telephonist at the Hôtel de la Gare. My Vichy colleague told her that I'd probably be in my office in Avenue Victoria by around 2 p.m. He asked her whether she could tell him what she was calling about, but she preferred to see me in person. I'm expecting her shortly. I'll be there. He didn't have a nap, but discovered the charming white turreted residence surrounded by gardens that was the Vichy police headquarters. A police officer led him down a corridor on the first floor, where an office almost empty of furniture had been put at Lecoeur's disposal. It's 5 to 2, said Lecoeur. I hope she's not going to change her mind. That reminds me, I'd better find a third chair. He could be heard opening doors in the corridor until he found what he was looking for. On the dot of 2 o'clock, the duty officer knocked on the door and announced, Madame Dubois. She came into the room, a petite, lively woman with dark hair and a very mobile gaze that darted from one man to the other. Who should I speak to? Lecoeur introduced himself, but didn't mention Maigret, who sat down in a corner. I don't know if what I have to tell you is of any use to you. At the time, I didn't attach any importance to it. The hotel's full. I had a lot of work, up till 1 o'clock in the morning, then, as usual, I went to sleep. It's about one of our guests, Madame Lange. I presume you mean Mademoiselle Francine Lange? I thought she was married. I know that her sister's dead, and that she was buried this morning. Last night, at about 8:30, someone asked to be put through to her. A man? A man, yes, with a very strange voice. I'm almost certain he suffers from asthma, because I had an uncle who had it and who spoke just like that. He didn't give his name. Number. He didn't ask for the room number. No, I rang, but no one answered, so I told him that the person he wished to speak to was not in her room. He called again at around 9 o'clock, and there was still no answer from room 406. Mademoiselle Lange and her companion had only one room for the two of them? Yes. The man called back a third time at 11 o'clock, and this time Mademoiselle Lange answered. I put him through. She looked embarrassed, glanced over at Maigret as if to gauge the effect her next words would have on him. She, too, must have recognized him. "Did you listen in?" asked Lecoeur kindly. "I'm sorry. I don't normally. We have a reputation for eavesdropping, but if people knew how uninteresting it is, they'd think differently. Perhaps it's because of the sister's murder, or because of the man's strange voice." "Who's calling?" she asked. "Am I speaking to Mademoiselle Francine Lange?" "Yes. Are you alone in the room?" She hesitated, but I was almost positive her companion was with her. "Yes. And what business is that of yours?" "I have a confidential message for you. Listen carefully. If we're cut off, I'll call you back in half an hour." He was wheezing, sometimes making a sort of whistling sound, like my uncle. "I'm listening. You still haven't told me who you are." "That doesn't matter. It is essential that you remain in Vichy for a few days. It is in your interest. I'll contact you. I'm not sure when yet. Our conversation could earn you a very large sum of money. Do you understand?" He stopped talking and hung up. After a few minutes, room 406 rang. "Mademoiselle Lange here. I have just received a telephone call. Can you tell me whether it came from Vichy or elsewhere?" "From Vichy." "Thank you. There. At first I thought it was none of my business. Then, this morning, I was unable to go to sleep, and I telephoned here to ask who was in charge of the investigation." She fiddled anxiously with her handbag, her gaze flitting between the two men. "Do you think it's important? You haven't been back to the hotel?" "I'm not on duty again until 8 o'clock this evening. Mademoiselle Lange has left." "Didn't she go to her sister's funeral?" "She left Vichy almost immediately afterwards." "Oh." Then, after a silence, "You think that man wanted to lure her into a trap, don't you? He wouldn't happen to be the strangler, would he?" She turned pale at the idea of having had the murderer of the lady in lilac on the end of the line. Maigret did not regret missing his nap. Chapter 5. Once the telephonist had left, the two men stayed where they were, Maigret puffing on his pipe, Lecoeur smoking a cigarette that came close to singeing his moustache. The smoke hung in wisps above their heads. In the courtyard, a dozen or so officers could be heard doing gymnastics. There was a prolonged silence. Both were seasoned veterans who knew the ins and outs of the job. They'd had dealings with all sorts of criminals, all sorts of witnesses. "It was obviously the killer who telephoned," sighed Lecoeur at length. Maigret didn't reply immediately. They didn't react in the same way. Without mentioning the word methods, one which neither of them liked, they had different approaches to a problem. Now, since the lady in lilac had been strangled, Maigret had not thought a great deal about the murderer. This was not deliberate. He was somehow haunted by the woman, whom he kept seeing in his mind's eye, sitting on her yellow chair in front of the bandstand, with her long face and gentle smile, which was sometimes belied by the steeliness of her gaze. That image had been fleshed out a little when he'd visited the house in Rue du Bourbonnais, learned about her time in Nice, her life in Paris, or at least the little that was known, and even the books she read. The strangler was only a shape, a tall, muscular man, whom Madame Virevaux claimed to have seen on the corner of the street, walking very fast, and a bar owner had noticed without being able to make out his features. Imperceptibly, Maigret was starting to think about him. I wonder how he found out that Francine Lang had booked into the Hôtel de la Gare. The newspapers that had reported on the arrival of the victim's sister had not given the address where she was staying. Maigret advanced cautiously, hesitantly. Why would he not quite simply have telephoned different hotels and asked to speak to Mademoiselle Lange? He imagined him in front of a telephone directory. The list of hotels must be very long. Had he proceeded in alphabetical order? "You could perhaps call a hotel whose name begins with A or with B." With an amused look in his eye, Lecoeur picked up the receiver. "Would you get me the Hôtel d'Angleterre? Number not the management or reception. I'd like to speak to the telephonist." "Hello? Are you the telephone operator at the Hôtel d'Angleterre? This is the police judiciaire. Has someone asked to be put through to a certain Mademoiselle Lange? No, not the victim. Her sister, Francine Lange. That's right. Ask your colleague." He informed Maigret, "There are 2 of them on the switchboard. The hotel has 500 or 600 rooms." "Hello, yes. Yesterday morning? Pass me your colleague, would you? Hello? Was it you who took the call? Nothing struck you?" A croaky voice, you say? As if the man— "Yes. I understand. Thank you." And to Maigret, "Yesterday morning at around 10. A croaky voice, or rather that of a man who has trouble breathing. Someone who was taking the waters, as Maigret had thought from the very first day, and who had run into Hélène Lange by chance. He'd have followed her to find out where she lived. The telephone rang. It was the inspector who'd been sent to Lyon. He'd discovered no trace of the victim in the town's hotels, but a post office clerk remembered her. She'd come twice, both times to collect a fat padded envelope. The first time, the envelope had been waiting for a week. The second time, it had just arrived. "Do you have the dates?" Lost in thought, still puffing avidly on his pipe, Maigret watched his colleague at work. "Hello? Crédit Lyonnais? Have you got that list of deposits I requested?" "No. I'll have someone collect it later. Can you tell me if a payment was received immediately after the 13th of January last year and another the 22nd of February this year? I'll hold on, yes, It didn't take long. A deposit of 8,000 francs on the 15th of January. Another of 5,000 on the 23rd of February this year. The average deposit is 5,000 francs, is that correct? Nearly all are, with a few rare exceptions. I have the statement in front of me. I see that 5 years ago the sum of 25,000 francs was credited to the account. It is the only deposit of that size. Always in cash? Always. What is the balance on the account at present? 452,650. Lecoeur repeated the figure to Maigret. She was rich, he muttered, and yet she rented out furnished rooms during the season. He was surprised to hear Maigret reply, "He's very rich." It's true. It appears that this money all comes from the same source, a man who can pay 5,000 francs a month, occasionally larger sums. But that man was not aware that Hélène Lange was the owner of a little white house with pale green shutters in Vichy's France neighborhood. Each time he sent money, it was to a different address. Was the money not sent on a fixed date, and did Mademoiselle Lange deliberately not pick it up until a few days later, so as to be certain that her chosen post office wasn't being watched? A wealthy man, or in any case, very comfortably off. When he'd spoken to the sister on the phone, he hadn't made a precise arrangement. He'd asked her to stay in Vichy a few days longer and to wait for his call. Why? He must be married. He's here with his wife and perhaps his children. He's not free when he wants. Now Lecoeur was intrigued to watch Maigret's brain at work. Was it really his brain, though? He was now trying to get under the man's skin. Rue du Bourbonnais, he didn't find what he was looking for, and Hélène Lange didn't talk. If she'd talked, she probably wouldn't have died. He wanted to frighten her to get the information he needed out of her. So, despite his wife, he was free that evening. Maigret fell silent, pondering this objection. What was on at the theatre on Monday? Lecoeur picked up the telephone to inquire. Tosca, it was a sellout. This wasn't rigorous reasoning, true. It wasn't even reasoning. Maigret tried to imagine a man, a fairly important figure, probably staying at one of the best hotels in Vichy. He had his wife, his friends. The previous day, or the day before that, he'd run into Hélène Lange and followed her to find out where she lived. That evening, Tosca was being performed at the Grand Casino Theatre. Aren't women fonder of Italian opera than men? Why don't you go without me? I'm tired from my treatment. I'll take the opportunity to have an early night. What information did he want from Hélène Lange, and why did she obstinately refuse to talk? Had he gone into the house before her, forcing an easy lock, and searched her apartment before she arrived home? Or had he only turned up once she was back home, and had he already killed her when he ransacked the place? Why that little smile, Chief? Because I'm thinking of a stupid detail. Before the Hôtel de la Gare, the murderer must, if he went in alphabetical order, have made 30 or so phone calls. Does that not suggest something to you? He filled a fresh pipe. The entire police force is looking for him. His wife is probably staying with him in a hotel room. However, he has to repeat numerous times a surname that is the same as that of the victim. In hotels, all calls go through the switchboard. Furthermore, there's his wife to contend with. It's risky to telephone from a cafe or a bar where there's the possibility of being overheard. If I were you, Lecoeur, I'd have a certain number of men watching the public call boxes. But he did get hold of Francine Lang. He's going to call her back. She's not in Vichy anymore. He doesn't know that. In Paris, like most husbands, Maigret saw his wife 3 times a day, when he woke up, at midday, and in the evening, although he sometimes didn't go home for lunch. So during the rest of the day, he could have got up to anything without her knowing. But in Vichy? They were together almost 24 hours a day, and he wasn't the only one in this situation. He can't even linger too long in a call box. Maigret sighed. He probably went out to buy cigarettes or get a breath of fresh air while his wife was getting dressed. 1 or 2 telephone calls. If she was taking the waters as well, and if she was having hydrotherapy, that gave him a little more time to himself. He imagined this man taking advantage of every opportunity, creating them, like a kid lying to his mother. A portly man of a certain age, wealthy, with an important job in Vichy to try to find a cure for his asthma. Does it not surprise you that the sister left? Francine Lang liked money. Goodness knows what she'd got up to when she lived in Paris to come by it. Now she owned a thriving business. She was going to inherit her sister's fortune. But was she the sort of woman to thumb her nose at a large sum? Was it the police she feared? It seemed unlikely. Unless she'd decided to flee for good, to go abroad. No, she'd return to La Rochelle, where the police could question her just as well as in Vichy. For the time being she was still on the road, her boyfriend at the wheel, while youths turned their heads to stare enviously after the red convertible. She'll arrive around mid-afternoon because they must be driving fast. Have the newspapers mentioned that she lives in La Rochelle? No. They only reported her arrival. She was already afraid this morning at the funeral parlour and at the cemetery. I wonder why it was you she was looking at covertly. I think I understand. Maigret smiled, not without embarrassment. The press has given me a reputation as a sort of confessor. She must have been tempted to confide in me, to ask me for advice. Then she said to herself that it was too big a thing. Lecoeur frowned. I don't see. The man tried to get a piece of information out of Hélène Lange, and this information was important enough to make him lose all control. It's rare for someone to strangle a person in cold blood. He came to Rue du Bourbonnais unarmed. He didn't intend to kill, but he left empty-handed. Thinking of the strangling, Maigret added, so to speak. He presumes the sister has the same piece of information. It's certain. Otherwise he wouldn't have gone to so much trouble, and he wouldn't have taken so many risks to find out where she was staying. He wouldn't have telephoned her and wouldn't have hinted to her about the payment of a large sum. What about her? Does she know what he wants from her? It's possible, muttered Maigret, checking the time on his watch. It's likely, isn't it? As is proved by the fact that she was scared enough to leave without telling us anything. I have to go and meet my wife. He nearly added, like the other fellow. Like that portly man with broad shoulders who had to make up childish excuses to go and telephone from a call box. Who knows? In the course of their daily strolls, the Maigrets had perhaps walked past that couple several times. It was possible that they'd sat next to them when drinking their glass of water, that their chairs— Don't forget the phone booths. I need as many men as you have in Paris. I never have enough. When are you going to call La Rochelle? At around 6 o'clock, before I leave for Clermont-Ferrand, where I have an appointment with the examining magistrate. He's waiting for me at his home. This case is troubling him because he's closely connected with the Compagnie de Vichy, which doesn't appreciate this kind of publicity. If you want to be present. Madame Maigret was waiting for him on a bench. Never in their lives had the Maigrets sat on so many park benches and chairs. He was late, but she didn't reprimand him, contenting herself to observe that he seemed to be in a different mood from earlier. She knew that expression, half frowning, half pensive. Where are we going? For a walk. Like the other days, like the other couple. The wife wouldn't suspect anything. She went for strolls with her husband, unaware that he quaked at the sight of every police uniform. He was a murderer. He couldn't run away without coming under suspicion. Like the Maigrets, he had to carry on with his daily routine. Was he staying in one of the 2 or 3 luxury hotels? It was none of Maigret's business, but if he were Lecoeur— Lecoeur is an excellent police officer, he muttered. Which meant deep down, he's bound to think of it. There aren't so many guests in those hotels for— But he wished he could go and sniff around himself. Don't forget your appointment with Ryan. Is it today? Tomorrow, at 4 o'clock. Once again he'd have to get undressed, allow himself to be prodded and poked, clamber onto the weighing machine and listen to the fair-haired young doctor earnestly discussing the amount of water he was to drink from now on. Was he going to send him to a different spring? He thought of Janvier, who'd moved into his office because Lucas was on holiday too. He'd chosen the mountains, somewhere near Chamonix. A string of small sailing boats was slowly tacking into the wind. Couples on pedalos drifted by, and there were miniature golf courses every 50 meters along the wall bordering the Allier. Maigret caught himself turning around each time they passed a portly man of a certain age. For him, Hélène Lange's killer had stopped being a shadowy image. He was beginning to take shape, to acquire a personality. He was in the town, somewhere on one of the walks the Maigrets took with such regularity. His movements were similar to theirs, and he saw the same sights, the sailing boats, the pedalos, the yellow chairs in the park, and the crowd strolling by at a monotonous pace. Rightly or wrongly, Maigret saw him with a wife at his side, a fairly plump woman too, complaining her feet hurt. What did they talk about as they walked? What did all those couples among whom the Maigrets found themselves say to each other? He had killed Hélène Lange. He was wanted. One word, one gesture, one slip-up, and he'd be arrested. His entire life destroyed. His name on the front page of the newspapers. His friends flabbergasted, his fortune and that of his family jeopardized. A police cell instead of a comfortable apartment. The transformation could happen within a few minutes, a few seconds. A stranger was perhaps going to tap him on the shoulder, and when he looked around, he would find himself face to face with a police badge. "Are you Monsieur—" Monsieur who? It didn't matter. The shock, his wife's outrage. "It must be a mistake, Inspector. I know him well. He's my husband. Everyone will tell you. Speak up for yourself, Jean." Jean, or Pierre, or Gaston. Maigret kept covertly looking around him. But he's still trying. He's still trying to what? Trying to find out the truth. What are you talking about? You know who I'm talking about. He telephoned Francine Lang. He wants to talk to her. Won't he get caught? If she'd told Lecoeur in time, they'd have set up a trap. It's still possible. He's not familiar with her voice. Lecoeur is bound to have thought of that. He just needs to put a woman of around her age in room 406. When the man calls— Maigret stopped in his tracks and growled, his fists clenched as if enraged. What the hell can he be looking for to take such a huge risk? A man's voice replied, "Hello, who do you wish to speak to?" "I'd like to speak to Mademoiselle Francine Lange." "Who's calling?" "Chief Superintendent Lecoeur." "One moment, please." Maigret was sitting facing Lecoeur in the bare office and was holding the extra listening device to his ear. "Hello? Could you call back tomorrow morning?" "No? In half an hour?" "In half an hour I'll be on the road." "We've only just got here. Mademoiselle Lange is in her bath. Ask her from me to get out of it." Lecoeur winked at his Paris colleague. Once again Lucien Romanel's voice could be heard. "She'll be with you in a moment. She's just drying herself." "I get the impression that you didn't drive very fast." "We broke down. We lost nearly an hour trying to find a spare part. Here she is. Hello?" Her voice sounded more distant than that of her boyfriend. "Mademoiselle Lange, this morning you told me that you'd be staying in Vichy for another 2 or 3 days. That was my intention. I changed my mind." "May I ask why?" "I could answer that I changed my mind, and that's that. I have a right to, don't I? And I have a right to request a court order and force you to talk. What difference does it make whether I'm in Vichy or La Rochelle? For me, a very big one. Now, I repeat my question. What made you change your mind?" "I was scared." "Of what?" "You know very well. I was already afraid this morning, but I told myself he wouldn't dare." "Could you be clearer, please?" "Afraid of whom?" "Of the man who strangled my sister. I thought that if he went for her, he's capable of going for me." "For what reason?" "It's hard to say." "Do you know him?" "No." "You don't have the slightest idea who it could be?" "No. And yet, at midday, having just told me you'd be extending your stay in Vichy, you left the hotel in a great hurry." "I was scared." "You are lying. Or, to be more specific, you had a particular reason to be scared." "I told you. He killed my sister. He could just as easily— For what reason?" "I don't know." "And you don't know why your sister was killed either?" "If I knew, I'd have told you. In that case, why haven't you told me about the telephone call?" He imagined her in her bathrobe, her hair damp, in the apartment where the suitcases had just been opened. Did her telephone have a second earpiece? Otherwise, Romanelle must be standing in front of her, darting her questioning looks. What telephone call? The one you received yesterday evening at your hotel? I don't see what you— Do I need to remind you what the caller said? Did he not advise you to stay in Vichy for another 2 or 3 days? Did he not tell you that he'd be back in touch with you, and that you could receive a very large sum of money? I barely listened. Why? Because I thought it was a joke. Is that not your impression? Number. A very sharp no, followed by a menacing silence. On the other end of the line she was unnerved and was struggling to find something to say. Well, I'm not from the police. I'm telling you I thought it was a practical joke. Do people often play this sort of practical joke on you? Not this sort. Was it not that telephone conversation that frightened you enough to make you leave Vichy as quickly as possible? Because you don't believe me. I'll believe you when you're telling the truth. It scared me. What? Knowing that the man was still in town. All women must be frightened at the idea of a strangler roaming the streets. Although the hotels haven't suddenly emptied. Have you ever heard that voice before? I don't think so. A very distinctive voice. I didn't notice. I was too surprised. Earlier, you mentioned a bad joke. I'm tired. The day before yesterday, I was still on holiday in the Balearics. I've barely slept since. That's no reason to lie. I'm not used to being questioned, especially over the telephone, after being dragged out of my bath. If you prefer, in 1 hour, you'll receive an official visit from my colleague in La Rochelle, and everything you say will be duly taken down. I'm doing my best to answer you. Maigret's eyes were laughing. The cur was doing a good job. That was not how he would have gone about it himself, but the result would have been the same. You knew yesterday that the police were looking for your sister's murderer. You were not unaware that the slightest clue could be valuable. I suppose so. And there is every chance that your invisible caller could be the murderer. That occurred to you. You were even certain of it because you were frightened. Now you are a woman who's not faint-hearted. I might have thought it, but I wasn't certain. In your shoes, anyone else would have rung us to inform us. Why did you not do so? You're forgetting that I just lost my sister, who was my only relative, and that her funeral took place today. And you weren't upset in the slightest. How do you know? Answer my question. You might have detained me. It's not urgent business that's calling you back to La Rochelle because you were supposed to be staying in the Balearics a few days longer. I found the atmosphere oppressive. The idea that this man— Was it not rather the idea that, following that phone call, we might ask you certain questions? You might have used me as bait. When he called me back to arrange a meeting, you'd have sent me there and— Nothing. I was scared. Why was your sister strangled? How am I supposed to know? Someone tracked her down after a number of years, followed her, broke into her home. I thought she'd caught him red-handed burgling her. You are not so naive. He had a question he wanted to ask her, a crucial question. What? That's what I'm trying to find out. Your sister had come into an inheritance, Mademoiselle Lange. From whom? That's what I'm asking you. We both inherited from my mother. She wasn't rich, a haberdashery in Marseille, and a few thousand francs in savings. Was her lover wealthy? What lover? The one in Paris who used to go and see her once or twice a week in her apartment in Rue Notre-Dame-de-Lorette. I don't know anything about it. You never met him? No. Don't hang up, mademoiselle. This is likely to continue for some time. Hello? I'm still here. Your sister was a shorthand typist. You were a manicurist. I became a beautician. Fine. 2 young women from Marseille whose parents had no money. You both go to Paris. You don't arrive together, but for several years the two of you see each other. What's so unusual about that? You claim you know nothing of your sister's doings. You can't even tell me where she worked. First of all, there was the age difference between us. And then, we never got along well, even when we were little. I haven't finished. It happens that soon we find you, still young, owner of a hair salon in La Rochelle, which must have cost you a lot of money. I paid part of the purchase price through annuities. It is possible that later on we may need more details regarding that matter. Meanwhile, your sister vanishes from sight, so to speak. First of all, she spends 5 years in Nice. Did you go and visit her? Number. Did you have her address? She sent me 3 or 4 postcards. In 5 years? We had nothing to say to each other. What about when she moved to Vichy? She didn't tell me. She didn't write to say that she was now living in this town and had bought a house here. I found out through friends. What friends? I don't remember. People who'd met her in Vichy. And who'd spoken to her. Possibly. You're getting me confused. Lecoeur, pleased with himself, winked again at Maigret, whose pipe had gone out, and who was engaged in a complicated maneuver to fill another one without letting go of the earpiece. Did you go to the Crédit Lyonnais? What Crédit Lyonnais? The one in Vichy? No. You weren't curious to find out how much you were going to inherit? My notary here is dealing with the estate. I don't understand anything about these things. Even though you're a businesswoman, do you have any idea how much your sister had in the bank? There was another silence. I'm listening. I can't answer you. Why not? Because I don't know. Yet, would you be surprised to learn that it is close to 500,000 francs? That's a lot. She said that calmly. It's a lot for a little typist who left Marseille one fine day and only worked for around 10 years in Paris. She didn't confide in me. Think before you answer, because we have ways of checking whether or not you are speaking the truth. When you moved to La Rochelle, was it not your sister who made the initial payments? Another silence. And silence makes much more of an impression over the telephone than when you have a person in front of you. There is a total cut-off. Do you need to think? She lent me a little money. How much? I'll have to ask my notary. At that time, was your sister not living in Nice? It's possible. Yes. So you were in touch with her, not only through an exchange of postcards. It is likely you went to see her to tell her about your project. I must have gone there. You told me the opposite a moment ago. Your questions are getting me all muddled up. They are perfectly straightforward, but your answers are less so. Have you finished? Not yet. And I would advise you more strongly than ever not to hang up, which would force me to take some rather unpleasant steps. This time I want a clear answer, yes or no. Whose name is on the deed of sale of the business, yours or your sister's? In other words, was your sister the real owner? Number. Are you? Number. Who is? Both of us. So, you were partners, and you are trying to have me believe that you had no contact with your sister. That's family business, and it's nothing to do with anyone else. It is when there's a murder. It has nothing to do with— Are you certain? I don't suppose— You suppose it so little that you left Vichy in a panic. Do you have any more questions? Maigret nodded, grabbed a pencil from the desk and scribbled a few words on a notepad. Just a moment. Don't hang up. Is this going to take much longer? Now, you had a child, didn't you? I told you about it. You gave birth in Paris. Number. Why not? Maigret's note read simply, Where did she give birth? Where was the child registered? I didn't want anyone to know. Lecoeur probed further, perhaps because of the presence of his illustrious Paris colleague. Where did you go? To Burgundy. Where, exactly? Mesnil-le-Mont. Is that a village? More of a hamlet. Is there a doctor there? There wasn't in those days. And you chose to give birth in a hamlet where there was no doctor. How do you think our mothers managed? Was it you who chose that place? Had you already been there? Number, I looked at a road map. Did you go there alone? I wonder how you interrogate criminals if this is how you torment people who've done nothing, and who, on the contrary. I asked you if you went there alone. Number. That's better. You see, It's easier to tell the truth than to be evasive. Who was with you? My sister. You do mean your sister Helene? I don't have any others? This was the time when you both lived in Paris and you only met by chance. You didn't know where she worked. She could just as well have been a kept woman. That was none of my business. You didn't like each other. You had as little to do with each other as possible, but she suddenly gave up her job to go with you to a god-forsaken hamlet in Burgundy. Francine Lang had nothing to say. How long did you stay there? A month. At a hotel? At the inn. Did a midwife assist you? I'm not sure she was a midwife, but she helped all the local pregnant women. What is her name? She was over 65 at the time. She must be dead. You don't recall her name? Madame Radesh. Did you register the child at the town hall? Of course. Yourself? I was confined to bed. My sister went with the owner of the inn, who acted as witness. Did you see the register of births later? Why would I have gone to see it? Do you have a copy of the birth certificate? It was so long ago. Where did you go after that? Listen, I can't take any more. If you absolutely insist on questioning me for hours, come and see me here. Undeterred, Lecoeur asked, Where did you take the child? To Saint-André du Lavillon in the Vosges. By car? I didn't have a car in those days. Your sister neither. She's never driven. Did she go with you? Yes. And now make whatever you like of it. I'm sick and tired of this, do you hear? Sick. Upon which she hung up. This is the end of today's installment of the detective novel. However, the story itself is far from over. The next part will be released soon, or may already be out on our channel. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any new videos.